They believed they were completely safe, and that was the problem, because nothing looked wrong.
A trusted crew member turns violent mid-flight.
One injured pilot keeps flying, pushing the aircraft beyond its limits.
Opened his guitar case and reached inside. What he pulled out was not something anyone could mistake. A hammer. The attack didn't come from outside. It came from someone already inside the cockpit. Someone they trusted. Someone they worked with. Because in that moment, he wasn't a threat. He was a coworker. And that assumption was the most dangerous thing on that aircraft. This wasn't a malfunction. This wasn't an emergency. This was an attack. Not to negotiate, not to escape, but to make sure no one survived. He even took one more step, something almost no one noticed. The most dangerous moment isn't when something breaks. It's when someone decides they're willing to break everything. What pushed a trusted coworker to violently attack his own crew mid-flight? In a sealed cockpit, how do 3 dying pilots survive an armed attacker and keep a 200-ton aircraft under control? If you stay to the end, the entire case comes into focus. And the deeper we go, the more disturbing it becomes. The 7th of April, 1994. A Federal Express cargo flight lifting off from Memphis, Tennessee, headed for San Jose, California. No passengers, just crew and cargo. It began like every other shift. Inside the cockpit, 3 men moved through a checklist they had performed hundreds of times before. Captain David Sanders, First Officer James Tucker, Flight Engineer Andrew Peterson, all experienced, all trained, all calm. They weren't preparing for a crisis. They were preparing for a normal flight. The aircraft lifted off from Memphis, heavy with cargo, heavy with fuel, and completely ordinary. Climb power set, gear up, flaps retracted, the kind of rhythm that doesn't require thinking anymore, only muscle memory. Inside the cockpit, the tone was relaxed. They talked, they joked, they laughed. At one point, they commented on how messy the departure had been. What a mess. They checked the systems, confirmed settings.
After takeoff is complete.
Everything was exactly where it should be. Nothing felt wrong. Outside, the aircraft climbed through the sky over the American South. Inside, the conversation drifted from checklists to random things, geography, places far below them. The kind of conversation you only have when you believe you are completely safe. And that was the problem, because nothing looked wrong. Not the instruments, not the aircraft, and not even the 4th man on board. He wasn't a stranger, he wasn't a passenger, he was one of them. A FedEx employee, a flight engineer, traveling on the same aircraft. No one questioned him. Why would they? He had access. He had clearance. He belonged there. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. For the first 26 minutes of the flight, nothing happened. No alarms. No warnings. Just altitude, speed, and routine. The kind of silence that makes you forget how quickly things can break. At approximately 19,000 feet, the aircraft continued its climb. Stable, controlled, predictable. Inside the cockpit, the men were still talking, still unaware, still in control. And then, without warning, everything broke. A sudden impact. A sound that didn't belong inside a cockpit. Not mechanical, not electrical, human. No warning, no transition, just violence, immediate, close, and intentional. Confusion turned into realization in seconds.
What are you doing? God almighty!
This wasn't a malfunction. This wasn't an emergency. This was an attack, and the man responsible was already inside the cockpit. 3 trained pilots, 1 aircraft at 19,000 feet, and a threat they never saw coming. Not from outside, but from someone who had been sitting with them the entire time. Because this was never going to be a normal flight. It only looked like one. The attack didn't come from outside. It came from someone already inside the cockpit. Someone they trusted. Someone they worked with. His name was Auburn Calloway, a FedEx employee, a flight engineer, 42 years old, former Navy pilot, trained, qualified, experienced. He didn't look out of place, because he wasn't. He boarded the aircraft like any other employee, in uniform, calm, routine. To the crew, there was nothing unusual about him being there. He wasn't a passenger. He was a deadheading crew member, someone traveling on duty, but not actively assigned to operate the flight. That detail mattered, because it meant one thing: no one checked him, no bag inspection, no questioning, no suspicion, just access, full access, to the cockpit of a cargo aircraft. And inside that aircraft, he wasn't carrying luggage. He was carrying a plan. Hidden inside a guitar case were multiple weapons, 2 claw hammers, 2 heavy club hammers, a spear gun with a loaded spear, and a knife. This wasn't something he decided mid-flight. This had been prepared, organized, thought through, because what he was about to do was never meant to be a hijacking. It was meant to look like an accident, a crash, a tragedy, something no one would question. The day before the flight, Calloway moved over $54,000 in assets to his ex-wife. He changed the beneficiaries on his insurance policies and left behind a note described in court as showing apparent despair. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated. He believed something was about to happen to him. A disciplinary hearing, scheduled the very next day, for falsifying his flight hours. And in his mind, that hearing had only one outcome: termination, loss of job, loss of income, loss of identity. Everything he had built about to collapse, so he created a different ending. One where he wouldn't be fired, one where he wouldn't be blamed, one where his death would look like an accident. Because if the plane went down, he wouldn't be a suspect, he would be a victim, and his family would receive the payout. That was the plan: not to take control of the aircraft, not to negotiate, not to escape, but to make sure no one survived. He even took one more step, something almost no one noticed. Before takeoff, Calloway reached up and pulled the circuit breaker for the cockpit voice recorder. He reached up, pulled the breaker, and sat back down, calm, composed, like nothing had happened. Nobody saw it, nobody reacted, because nobody was watching him. They were busy flying the aircraft, doing their jobs, trusting the man sitting next to them. If it had stayed off, there would be no record of what was about to happen. No voices, no proof, no evidence, just a crash. But someone saw it. Flight engineer Andrew Peterson. He noticed the breaker and turned it back on, thinking it had been switched off by mistake. That single action changed everything, because without it, this story wouldn't exist. For the next 26 minutes, nothing happened. Calloway sat there, silent, still, waiting. Inside the same cockpit, surrounded by the same men, listening, watching, planning. No one questioned him. No one checked his bag. No one imagined what he was about to do. Because in that moment, he wasn't a threat. He was a coworker. And that assumption was the most dangerous thing on that aircraft. Because this wasn't just one man's decision. This was a system that never expected someone like him to become the danger. And at 19,000 feet, that mistake was about to become irreversible. For 26 minutes, nothing happened. The aircraft climbed, the crew worked, and Auburn Calloway waited. He wasn't reacting, he was timing it. At approximately 19,000 feet, inside a quiet cockpit, he stood up. No warning, no announcement, just movement, calm, deliberate. He stepped out into the area just behind the cockpit, opened his guitar case, and reached inside. What he pulled out was not something anyone could mistake: a hammer. Seconds later, he stepped back into the cockpit. There was no conversation, no hesitation, no attempt to explain. He raised the hammer and swung. The cockpit at that moment became the most dangerous place on Earth. A sudden impact, a sound that didn't belong inside a cockpit. The reaction was immediate. Not understanding, just pain. Another strike, then another.
God, what are you doing? God almighty!
In seconds, the situation changed from confusion to certainty. This wasn't an accident. This was an attack. Inside a sealed cockpit, at 19,000 feet, 3 pilots were being beaten by a man they had trusted minutes earlier. There was no space to escape, No time to process, only reaction. The blows were targeted, fast, repeated, designed to disable, not warn. Flight engineer Andrew Peterson was hit first, then First Officer James Tucker, then Captain David Sanders. The force was enough to fracture skulls, enough to disorient, enough to kill. He's going to kill us. The cockpit filled with noise, voices, struggle, impact. Nothing controlled anymore. Then it escalated. Calloway stepped back and reached for something else. A spear gun, loaded, pointed directly at the crew.
Sit down. This is a real gun. I'll kill ya.
Now, it was clear. This wasn't rage. This wasn't panic. This was planned. He wasn't trying to scare them. He was trying to finish it. Inside the cockpit, the balance of power had shifted. 3 injured pilots, 1 attacker with weapons. But the aircraft was still in the air, and someone still had to fly it. Through the chaos, through the pain, one voice cut through. Focused, controlled.
Andy? I got the airplane.
First Officer James Tucker, despite the blows to his head, despite the damage already done, he reached forward and took control. Because if no one flew the aircraft, none of them would survive. But control didn't mean safety. Not anymore. The struggle wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because now, they weren't just fighting a man. They were fighting inside a machine that could kill all of them in seconds. And every move, from this point forward, would push that aircraft closer to its limit. The aircraft was still in the air, but nothing inside it was stable anymore. Not the cockpit, not the crew, not even the man flying it. James Tucker had control, but control didn't mean safety. He had already taken multiple blows to the head, severe enough to fracture his skull, severe enough to affect his movement, and still, he was the only one holding the aircraft steady. Behind him, the fight hadn't stopped. In the narrow space between the cockpit and the galley, 3 injured men struggled against 1 attacker, grabbing, pulling, trying to stop him. There was no coordination anymore, no procedure, just instinct. Calloway was still armed, still aggressive, still trying to finish what he started. At one point, he forced them back and raised the weapon again.
I'll kill you.
Inside the cockpit, alarms began to trigger. Bank angle warnings, overspeed alerts, repeated signals, telling them something was wrong with the aircraft itself. Because Tucker wasn't just controlling the aircraft anymore, he was using it as a weapon, but he wasn't whole. Behind him, in the narrow galley, Captain Sanders and Flight Engineer Peterson were fighting a losing battle. Calloway was armed, relentless, and he was about to strike again. Tucker realized something terrifying. They couldn't win a fist fight, so he decided to use the only weapon he had left, the aircraft. Tucker pulled the yoke back, hard, a violent 15-degree climb. The sudden G-force threw everyone, Calloway, Sanders, and Peterson, out of the cockpit and slamming onto the floor. But Calloway scrambled back up. He raised the hammer again, so Tucker did the impossible. He turned the yoke all the way to the left, and he rolled the aircraft. This wasn't a fighter jet. This was a fully loaded, 200-ton McDonnell Douglas DC-10. It was never designed to do this. Tucker rolled the massive plane on its side, then pushed it past 140 degrees, almost completely upside down. In the back, gravity vanished. The combatants were thrown off the floor and pinned directly to the ceiling of the aircraft. But Tucker didn't stop. He needed to keep Calloway off balance. He needed to break him. While inverted, Tucker pushed the yoke forward and sent the massive cargo plane into a vertical dive. The speed gauge maxed out, 500 miles per hour, approaching the speed of sound. The wings began to flutter. The airframe screamed. It was being pushed past its absolute structural limit. The aircraft was tearing itself apart. Tucker was flying a plane that was dying, while he himself was bleeding out. But the insane physics of that dive did exactly what it was meant to do. It neutralized the attacker. It gave the dying crew a chance to fight back. Captain David Sanders, already badly injured, moved forward. He reached for control, not just of the attacker, but of the aircraft itself. At the same time, Tucker left his position, stepping away from the controls to help restrain Calloway. For a moment, no one was fully in control. inside a heavy cargo aircraft, mid-flight, with alarms still active and a violent struggle still underway. Then Sanders took the seat, strapped in, and took over. He was bleeding, disoriented, but focused, because now the problem had changed. This wasn't just about surviving the attack. This was about landing the aircraft, and they were running out of time. Behind him, Tucker and Peterson continued the fight, holding Calloway down, trying to keep him from reaching another weapon. Inside the cockpit, Sanders made the call.
We've had an attempted takeover. I've been wounded. We need to get back to Memphis.
The initial distress call was actually made by First Officer James Tucker. His voice was steady, controlled. Even now, air traffic control responded, calm, prepared, telling him help would be waiting. But none of that mattered yet, because they still had to get the aircraft down, and nothing about this landing was going to be normal. The aircraft was heavy, still carrying fuel, still carrying cargo, and now, being flown by a man who had just survived a violent attack. Inside the cockpit, blood covered the surfaces, the controls, the floor, the space where they had been fighting seconds earlier, and yet they were still flying. Not because the situation was under control, but because they refused to lose it. This wasn't procedure anymore. This wasn't training. This was something else. This was survival, at the edge of what a human body could endure, and the aircraft was still in the air. By the time Captain David Sanders took control, the situation had already crossed the point of recovery. This was no longer a normal flight, not a standard emergency, not something a checklist could solve. 3 crew members were seriously injured. The attacker was still alive, and the aircraft was still airborne. There was only one option left: get the plane back on the ground, as fast as possible. But even that was not simple. The aircraft wasn't configured to land. It was still in climb, still carrying far more speed than a safe landing would allow. And it was not in the right position to land. Too high, too fast, too unstable. Sanders knew it, and so did everyone on that aircraft, because landing under these conditions could destroy the plane. But staying in the air was worse. Behind him, the struggle continued. Tucker and Peterson were still holding Calloway down, trying to keep him from getting free again. They couldn't afford another attack. Not now. Inside the cockpit, Sanders made his decision. He was already in contact with air traffic control. They knew what was happening. They were clearing the way. Now the focus had shifted. Not communication, not survival, but the landing. But clearance didn't solve the real problem. The aircraft still had to descend, still had to align, still had to land, under conditions it was never meant to handle. Sanders adjusted the aircraft, carefully, deliberately. Every input mattered now. Too aggressive, and the aircraft could break apart. Too slow, and they wouldn't make it in time. There was no safe option, only the least dangerous one. And even then, nothing was guaranteed. Behind him, Calloway resisted again, fighting to break free. The struggle wasn't over. It was still happening. While the aircraft was preparing to land, Tucker and Peterson held him down, injured, exhausted, but still fighting, because if he got free again, everything would collapse. Inside the cockpit, Sanders focused on one thing: the runway. Memphis was in front of him, but reaching it was only half the problem. He needed more space, more time, more margin for error. So he made another decision. He requested a longer runway, runway 36L. At this speed, a shorter runway wouldn't just fail to stop the aircraft, it could tear it apart on impact, because under these conditions, anything shorter would not be enough. The aircraft continued its descent. Fast, heavy, unforgiving. Warnings triggered again. Systems alerting him to the risks, telling him what he already knew. This landing was outside normal limits, but there was no other choice. The ground approached, closer, faster. Inside the aircraft, everything depended on one moment. One approach, one landing, one chance. And in that moment, everything came down to a single decision: to land anyway, because waiting was no longer an option. The aircraft touched down, hard, heavy, but controlled. Against every condition it was facing, it landed. The wheels held, the structure held, and for the first time since the attack began, the aircraft slowed down. Inside, the fight was over. Calloway was restrained, pinned down, outnumbered. Emergency crews moved in. The doors opened, and reality caught up with what had just happened. 4 men were taken off that aircraft, 3 victims, and 1 attacker, all of them alive. From the outside, it looked like survival, a disaster avoided, a story about pilots who fought back and won. And that's how it was told. In headlines, in reports, in documentaries, a violent struggle in the sky, a crew that refused to die, a landing that should not have been possible. But that version misses something. Because this was never just about what happened in the air. Access, trust, familiarity. Not because the system failed, but because it was never built to expect this. An insider, not an outsider. Someone already inside the structure, turning it against itself. And once that trust was broken, there was nothing left to stop him, except the people sitting next to him. 3 men who refused to let that plan finish, who fought through injuries, through confusion, through a situation no system could prepare them for, and change the outcome. Not by following procedure, but by refusing to lose control. Because in the end, this wasn't just about a man trying to destroy an aircraft. It was about how close he came to making it look like nothing had happened at all. After the aircraft stopped, the story didn't end. Auburn Calloway was taken into custody, charged, tried in federal court. The evidence was clear: the weapons, the financial transfers, the preparation. There was no confusion about what had happened, only the outcome had changed. He was convicted of attempted aircraft piracy and sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. For the crew, survival came at a cost. The injuries they suffered that day didn't disappear after the landing. They had done something almost impossible, but their bodies had taken the impact. None of them returned to commercial flight, not because they lacked skill, but because of what their bodies had endured. The aircraft was repaired, returned to service, and eventually retired years later. On the surface, everything moved forward. That's what makes this different. Not the violence, not the aircraft, not even the plan, but the moment an ordinary person crosses a line that doesn't appear suddenly, a line that builds slowly, over time. Pressure, fear, desperation, until one decision changes everything. Because nothing about Auburn Calloway suggested this outcome to the people around him. He had a career, experience, structure, and still, he reached that point. The point where the system no longer mattered, where consequences no longer mattered, only the outcome. And that raises a different question. Not about aviation, not about security, not about procedure, but about something much closer. How far can a person be pushed before they stop seeing limits? Because the most dangerous moment isn't when something breaks. It's when someone decides they're willing to break everything. And on that flight, at 19,000 feet, that line was crossed.